You've talked with them. You know what kind of a person they are. You've at least had some interaction with them. But are you going to have interaction with a congressman from another state? No. So what he's saying is the state's going to have this power because it has more the ability to influence the people in their neighborhood, the people that they know, than it is. Matt Gaetz isn't going to have much ability to influence us here, is he? Because we don't see him. But your local congressman will. Why? Because he has to come home. And if he doesn't, and if he does bad, and he's got family in the area, which he should, you can shame him. So, this concept that he's got right here, that the several state officers are going to be greater, and they're going to be more in tune with the people than the federal government somewhere far away. So in that respect alone, the federal government has less power over the people than the state governments do. And you're going to have a little bit of control in interaction with your congressman, but not with everybody's. So it's a safety to the powers of the state. Does that make sense? And he said, and in sheer number, there's going to be more people in the state. Think about how many counties you guys got?
92.
92. Okay, so in Indiana, you've got 92 separate 3 branches of government, right? And then the townships have officers. So if you were to take Indiana and count up all those local and municipal authorities, and put them all together, it's probably going to equal or be a little bit larger than what the 545 in Washington, D.C., isn't it? So that's what he's saying. The federal officers will be very few compared to just the state officers of the 13 states and probably more states. So if we were to take all of those municipal officers and all of those local authorities and put them together, it would greatly outnumber the federal officers, wouldn't it? That was until we started all the alphabet soup agencies. So do you see why Madison's plan was perfect and how we ruined it in the 20th century with the progressive ideology? And how were we able to ruin it during the progressive ideology? Because people wanted to be ignorant of this, right? Because ignorance is bliss. Oh, I don't need to know that stuff. That's what I hired government to do. They wouldn't do me wrong. Your government wouldn't lie to you. They're there for you. No. You are not their children. They are your children. And you need to keep your children well behaved. And we haven't done that for too long. Jason, where did I leave off? Compare the members of the 3 great departments of the 13 states, excluding from the Judiciary Department the Justices of the Peace, with the members of the corresponding departments of the single government of the Union. Compared the militia officers of 3 millions of people with the military and marine officers of any establishment which is within the compass of probability, or, I may add, of possibility, and in this view alone, we may pronounce the advantage of the states to be decisive. Decisive. If the federal government is to have collectors of revenue, the state government will have theirs also. And as those of the former will be principally on the sea coast, and not very numerous, whilst those of the latter will be spread over the face of the country, and will be very numerous. The advantage in this view also lies on the same side. So what did he say? If we have federal tax collectors, where are they going to be? On the seacoast. Explain the IRS office in Cincinnati then to me. Explain that. Yeah, see, that was a progressive ideology that got shoved down our throats because of our ignorance. Think about that. It said that the tax collectors for the federal government would be on the seacoast. Why do you think that would be? Foreign commerce. See, he's going to get into what those 4 powers are that the state, and it's only 4 powers. If you look in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18, which are the enumerated powers of Congress, that's the only thing Congress can do. If you look in there, all those powers fall into one of 4 things: war, peace, negotiation, or foreign commerce. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? It is true that the Confederacy is to possess and may exercise the power of collecting internal as well as external taxes throughout the states, but only for 2 years, right? But he says the Confederacy has that same power. We've just contained the power better in the Constitution. But it is probable that this power will not be resorted to except for supplemental purposes of revenue, war. That an option will then be given to the states to supply their quotas by previous collections of their own, and that the eventual collection under the immediate authority of the Union will generally be made by the officers and according to the rules appointed by the several states. Now remember, when he was talking in 39 about national over federal. Some of the powers were somewhat national, some were federal, some were a mix between national and federal. We got April 15th coming up. Well, I guess they moved it to April 18th now. What tax do you pay on April?
Income.
What is it?
Income tax.
State or federal?
Federal.
Federal, right? We always call it federal income tax. It's not a federal income tax, is it? If you understand what Madison was talking about in 39, it's a national income tax. When the federal government can come directly to the people, and they can only do that during a 2-year period prior to us destroying everything in the 16th and 17th Amendment, and through the progressive era of the 20th century, the federal government, the only way they get any money from the states is to go directly to the state. And then the state goes to the people to get the money. That's federal. If the state comes to me, the individual, and then the federal government comes to the state, that's federal. If the federal government comes directly to me, it's national. Words have meanings, doesn't it? It's just like all of our kids being taught that the type of government we live in is a democracy, right?
No.
That's a bunch of horse hooey.
Yeah, they stand right up on TV today and say it.
That's right. I heard it 3 times today on the news before I swore at the TV and turned it off. A lie told long enough becomes the truth. You understand that?
Yes.
So do you understand why the John Dewey Model Public School has dumbed us down to the point that we were stupid enough that we'd vote for the 16th and 17th Amendment? Do you think they're not planning it still?
Every day.
Then you better wake up. You better wake up. You need to wake your neighbors up. You need to wake your kids and your grandkids up. Because they will never have what freedom we had. And we lost so much that we thought we lived free. What was it that William Shakespeare said? Iron bars do not a prison make. Isn't it amazing how you can make people think that they've got some autonomy over the way they live, and they think that they're free, even though they're living in bondage? So if you want your children to have what level of liberty we had, which wasn't much, it's even more critical now than it has ever been. Should it happen, however, that separate collectors of internal revenue should be appointed under the federal government, the influence of the whole number would not bear a comparison with that of the multitude of state officers in the opposite scale. We kind of ruined that with the 16th. Within every district to which a federal collector would be allotted, there would not be less than 30 or 40 or even more officers of different descriptions, and many of them persons of character and weight whose influence would lie on the side of the state. The powers delegated This is the part I really want you to pay attention to in 45. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Remember, the Constitution limits the power of government, not the people. This is why the only powers that Congress have are found in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18. Now, prior to the 20th century, in the Progressive Era, we understood that the Constitution, the way you read it is, it will tell you only the power you have. What we've tried to do through the 20th century is, well, it didn't say I couldn't. No. That's not how it's read. That's not how it's read. Because if it had to list everything that the government couldn't do,
It'd be never ending.
we would have had the health care bill of Obama. And that wouldn't have been enough. 40-some thousand pages to the Constitution. So the Constitution doesn't tell government what it cannot do. It tells government precisely the only things that it can do. And that's few and defined. And it's few and defined in Article 1, Section 8, Clauses 1 through 18. That's it. And out of those 18 clauses, the powers that were delegated to the federal government by the states were only 4. War, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Now, every time I say that, people go, oh, Rutan, you're a nut. Federal government's got way more power than that. No, federal government wasn't intended to have more power than that. They call me crazy. Well, these aren't my words. They're Madison's words. Let's see what he said. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The former will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. So he says the federal government's power, those which are to remain, the former, he's talking about the federal government, will be exercised principally on external objects as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce, with which last the power of taxation will, for the most part, be connected. Now, why did he say will, for the most part, be connected? Because during a time of war, they could do an internal income tax or an internal tax for 2 years and only 2 years. Why? Because they didn't want some drooling moron in Washington, D.C. in the Oval Office to decide how many of your children could die in a war. Your representative had to vote for that before we decide to kill your children. And then, if it was too much, you had the opportunity to throw the bum out in 2 years. And the person that was going to campaign to get put in there would probably run on a, I won't vote for a war. You see how that was set up? Now, the last 2 of the longest wars we've ever had, that I lost quite a few friends in, were never voted on by my representative. Mr. Bush decided to go to the UN to get authority to bomb 2 countries that did nothing to us. That was aggression. Those were wars of aggression. They're immoral. The only moral war is a war of defense, not aggression. Had we been following the Constitution the way we should have been, we wouldn't be where we're at right now. Trust me on that. The operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger. Think about that. So the only time the federal government's really going to be important, the only time they're going to have that power to exercise is during times of war and danger. So do you understand now why the people in Washington, D.C., like Lindsey Graham, piece of crap, and McConnell, bigger piece of crap, who are supposed to be on the right, who are supposed to be people of the Constitution, are going, yeah, we need to fund this war in Ukraine. And then you got Pence, moron, going, yeah, and we ought to fight China and Russia too. You idiot. Do you understand why? Because during times of danger and war, who has the most extensive power? Morons sitting in the 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. Who was it? Rahm Emanuel that said, never let a good crisis go to waste? What do you think 2020 was all about? My grandfather, a long time ago, he said, he said, sometimes you can't get anything done unless there's controversy. I said, well, what do you do if there's no controversy, Grandpa? He said, start one. Well, he was right, wasn't he? Wasn't he right? So how do you think the federal government's doing? If there isn't any controversy, what we got to do is create one. What do you think 2020 was all about? Come on, take the red pill. Realize what the matrix is. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Go ahead.
What motivated or caused the War Powers Act for the president to be able to use? What brought that on?
Ignorance of the people. Plain and simple. And the lust of power by those that we elect. Those two things are what contributed to that.
And that gives the president the ability to send troops in.
Look, the president has to,
without the approval of
the
Congress.
president has to have the ability to do things that are an emergency situation. Okay? Sending people to a foreign land when we're not being attacked actively is not what was intended. What do we know about Europe? What did we learn in that 700 years of history leading up to our founding documents? That executives have very, very shallow egos, and if they've got a standing army, they will kill their own people and people of another country for stupid, stupid reasons. Right? You think our founding fathers didn't understand that? Sure, that's why in the House of Commons, they voted every year whether the king could have an army. Because who had to pay for the army? The people. And if king's got an army, they're expensive to keep. So what do you have to have an army doing? Fighting a war? They understood it. That was one of the chief arguments that the anti-federalists said. Well, you don't have any provision in there against a standing army in times of peace. They said, yeah. The legislature has to vote on it. That's picked by the great authority, which is the people, before the president can call forth the militia and put together an army. See, it's maintain a navy and raise an army. Well, we don't have to raise an army anymore. We got the largest military-industrial complex going. When did that all start? World War I. You're going to see in one of the last videos I've got to show of this series, Woodrow Wilson went to his propagandist and he said, I need you to turn the people into war-loving patriots. So they allowed 3,000 people to die. Something about that 3,000 people, it's just enough to turn us into war-loving patriots. World War II came around. You telling me we didn't know the Japanese were headed to Pearl Harbor? If you believe that, I got some oceanfront property to sell you in Arizona, right? To use a cliche. Now, we knew they were coming, but what did we need? How are we going to convert all these factories and do all this stuff and get homemakers to leave their home and go work in the factories and let the state train their children if we didn't turn the people into war-loving patriots? Well, all 3,000 people to die, and man, that happens just like that. If you want to send your troops to two countries that never bombed us, never hurt us, never did anything, and you want to be there for 20 years, what do? You allow 3,000 people to die in New York City, and that turns the people into war-loving patriots. How many people remember 9/11? That day, where you were, what you were doing. Yeah, it was amazing after that. All the flags came out. Even Democrats were flying flags. And they weren't rainbow ones, they were red, white, and blue ones. It's amazing. Do you think our federal government hasn't learned from the past too? We sure haven't. Because while we were sucking up that public education, John Dewey model public school that was set and predicated on the Communist Manifesto, we sat by idly while our government just kept asking for power. We just couldn't give them enough. And this is where we are.
Now we have Homeland Security.
Yeah, we sure do.
Yes.
And it hasn't kept anything secure, at least not the people.
Well, keeps them in control.
Patriot Act.
Yeah.
How many terrorists have we put in prison under the Patriot Act? None. No, wait a minute. Didn't the Declaration of Independence say we hold these truths to be self-evident? That all men, just in North America, were created equal. No, they didn't have just in North America in there, did they? They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That they're endowed by their Creator. That means, even terrorists. That means even terrorists should have due process. That even terrorists should have a speedy trial. That even terrorists should have the right to exculpatory evidence. That even terrorists have the right to face their accuser. Isn't that what our founding document said? But man, it's real easy to get the people to give up power. See, here's the thing that we all forget. During times like 9/11, when we go, yeah, we want a law to go after those bad guys. What's the 14th Amendment say? Equal protection of the law. So every time you create a law, it's equal tyranny over you as well, right? But we never think of that because, get the bad guy. Well, out of control government, pretty soon everybody's the bad guy. That's why we have the Department of Homeland Security and the Patriot Act. Right? It was real easy to get the Patriot Act through. Why? Because we turned the people into war-loving patriots. Not one person questioned that. Because if you did, you just simply weren't American. I know I got called that when I said, what in the world is this bag of crap? How in the world are we going to suspend God-given rights? Oh, John, we do that. And then 2020 came along. Right? Oh, this virus is going to kill everybody. You know, you need to give up your rights for... No. What does inalienable mean? It means that which is given to me by God can only be taken by that which is a given. So only God can take my right. But we decided, because 3,000 people were allowed to be killed by your own government. I'm not saying they did it. I'm saying they knew about it and didn't do anything to prevent it. Because of that, it was real easy for us to forget all about due process. It was easy for... Now what happened? We got about 1,000 people in a gulag in Washington, D.C. Why? Because they exercised their First Amendment right. And now they're sitting in a prison under the Patriot Act with no due process, no exculpatory right to evidence. Right? Did we not see Tucker Carlson and the rest of the video that was never given to the defense? Those prosecutors should be sitting in prison. But it was real easy to use 9/11 and 3,000 people's death to go, oh, you need to give us this power. And we went ever so easily, oh, you take that power, get the bad guy, without realizing the 14th Amendment eventually made us the bad guy. Principles are important. Words are important. Principles only work when we practice them, not when we preach them. Let that be a lesson. So the operations of the federal government will be most extensive and important in times of war and danger. Those are the state governments in the times of peace and security. As the former periods will probably bear a small proportion to the latter, the state governments will here enjoy another advantage over the federal government. So what they're saying is during times of war and danger are probably going to be very few and far between. And it was until the 20th century, until the progressives destroyed our Constitution. And so during times of peace, the state government with their state power will have a decisive advantage over the federal government. And that was the fear of the anti-federalists, that the federal government would usurp the powers of the state. And as long as we can keep having perpetual wars and have our people as a police force in 180 nations, who do you think retains the power? The federal government over the state. The more adequate indeed the federal powers may be rendered to the national defense, the less frequent will be those scenes of danger which might favor their ascendancy over the governments of the particular states. In the new if the new Constitution be examined with accuracy and candor, it will be found that the change which is proposed consists much less in the addition of new powers to the Union than in the invigoration of the original powers. The regulation of commerce, it is true, is a new power, but that seems to be an addition which few oppose. Now why? Now remember, we have really screwed up the Commerce Clause. We said anytime something's bought or sold, the federal government's got control of it. That's not what the Commerce Clause said. It said that the government had the ability to regulate trade among the several states, foreign powers in the Indian nations. Okay? That's the case. Since we deal with France, do you think we can go to France and demand that they have gun registration and that they have to have, the people have CPLs to be able to exercise their Second Amendment? Can we do that in foreign nations? No. Well, can we do that with the Indian tribes? No. They're a nation inside of a nation. Then why in the world do we think that we can do it in the several states with BATF? Does that make any sense? So regulate commerce meant to facilitate commerce, to make sure that the commerce between the several states was fair. That my money in Indiana spent the same by the same amount in Michigan. That my marriage license in Michigan was good in Florida. That my CPL in Michigan was good in New Jersey. Oh, wait a minute, not there. That doesn't work. Do you understand? You understand how the Commerce Clause has been ruined? Has been misidentified? Been misdefined? Right here he's talking about it. It's supposed to be at the border of the state, not inside the state. The federal government has no supremacy inside the sovereign state. None. Zero. Zippo. What did Madison tell us? Their powers are few and defined. The only place under 39 they have any authority, forts, ports, armories, Washington, D.C., Guam, Puerto Rico, and from the coast out 20 miles. That's it. That's it. and at the border of each state. That's it. That's the only authority of the federal government. The only authority. Does that make sense? So how is it that we have the FBI in our different states and doing these different things? It's because you've got sheriffs that like to take grant money. Grant money. What's grant money? Well, it's when we steal it from one group, put it together in a big pile, and then we use it like a carrot on a stick to get people